Hi, and welcome to our live event. We're very excited to be presenting this event, very excited and pleased to be joined by Maxime Bernier, also joined by Bill Brooks, who is going to be introducing Max in a few moments. And I'm Candice Malcolm with True North and also a columnist over at the Toronto Sun. So I'll just give a little bit of an overview and an introduction of the organizations before we get into the official program of the event, let everyone sort of get settled and get comfortable for this, what will definitely be an interesting and thought-provoking discussion and conversation. So as you might know, True North is a digital media organization. You can find our work at tnc.news, tnc.news. And the purpose behind True North is to provide fact-based news and also conservative editorial columns and podcasts. So we put out videos every day. We have lots and lots of news stories, lots of exclusive. We had an exclusive story recently out about a poll polling Canadians on immigration data. So we do a lot of work like that. And you can find our work at tnc.news. Civitas is a nonprofit organization, and it's essentially a society where ideas meet. It's a group of conservative, classical liberal, and libertarian people who just like to get together to talk about ideas, discuss current affairs. We host an annual meeting every year, and then we also do these sorts of community events. So the event that we're doing tonight was originally supposed to be an in-person event in Montreal, but because of the coronavirus and because of the lockdowns, we had to cancel it. We decided that instead of just permanently canceling it, we would move it to an online format instead, which is why we have this event tonight on Zoom. We did a Zoom event a couple of weeks ago with British author Douglas Murray, and it went really well. So we decided to replicate this and have our friend Maxime Bernier join us. So after Maxime gives his remarks, we're going to do a little bit of an interview with myself. And then after that, we'll open it up to the entire group. So you'll be able to ask your questions directly to Max. Without further delay, let's get to the sort of more interesting formal format of this evening. And in order to get going, I'll pass it over to my Civitas colleague, Bill Brooks. Bill is the original organizer of this event, which was supposed to be in Montreal. He is a longtime Civitas member. He's also a member of the board, and he edits Civitas's journal, which is called The Civil Conversation, that goes out to Civitas members. So I'll hand it over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Candice, and thanks again to True North for helping us complete this event and move on with it. I'll just give a little history about Max. Most people know Maxime Bernier, but in case you're not familiar with all of Max's work, he earned a law degree from the University of Ottawa. He's held positions in law, finance, and banking, and was executive vice president at the Montreal Economic Institute for several years. In the Harper government, he served as Minister of Industry, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of State for Small Business. After 2015, the year of infamy for the Conservative Party, he was opposition critic for innovation, science, and economic development. As many of you remember, in September 2018, Maxime moved on to found the People's Party of Canada. Since then, he's been called many things. Before the 2019 election, National Post columnist Bill Watson called Max a conservative in a hurry, but judged that the PPC platform was very consistent with conservative principles. Other people have been less kind. After the Liberal victory, Toronto Star columnist Douglas Kwan said the PPC was nothing but Maxime Bernier's vanity project. Not very nice. He's been referred to as Mad Max, and warmly from the West, the Albertan from Quebec. But despite it all, many in the Canadian conservative movement regard Maxime as a man of conviction. He risked a safe political career to put forward the ideas he feels would advance liberty and prosperity for Canada. And so we're very happy to be with Max tonight and to learn more about these ideas. So Max, we'll give you the screen.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Candice, and thank you to True North and Bill Brooks of Civitas Montreal for inviting me tonight. So the topic for this webinar is the path to recovery. Let's start right away with the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. I think governments massively overreacted to this crisis with disastrous consequences. There was no reason to close down most of the economy. The vast majority of these victims, as we all know by now, are older people with underlying conditions who lived in long-term care centers in Quebec and Ontario. This is tragic, of course, but if you are not one of these people, you had almost no risk of dying and becoming sick. And yet, millions of Canadians were locked down and millions lost their jobs. Think about this. Quebec, with 8.5 million inhabitants, had a very strict lockdown. It has also one of the highest rates of COVID victims in the world, with about 5,000 deaths. Sweden is a bit larger than Quebec, with a population of 10.2 million. It did not lock down its population and did not close its economy. It also ended up with fewer deaths than Quebec at 4,700. Of course, there are many factors that can explain what happened in different countries, but having a strict lockdown or no lockdown does not seem to be the determining factor. Other countries in Asia, like South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, did not impose strict lockdowns and had much better result than Canada. Instead of telling Canadians that they are racist, Trudeau should have closed the border right from the beginning in January. Grocery stores and pharmacies were considered essential services during the whole lockdown. They remained open and people adapted to social distancing measures. We could have adapted the same way in other stores and working environments. Instead of spending hundreds of billions of dollars to support the people who lost their jobs and businesses that were closed, we should have spent a fraction of this sum to hire more workers and protect seniors in long-term care centers. That's the real source of the crisis in Canada. If we had kept the economy open, the cost would have been much smaller. There is also evidence that the number of people who will die because of suicide or depression, cancer that was not diagnosed or treated in time, and other causes will in the end be greater than the number of people who were saved because of the lockdown. There was no rational cost-benefit analysis of this whole thing. Governments overreacted, and we will have to live with the consequences for years to come. It's too late to change any of this now, of course, but there is talk of a second wave of COVID-19 in the fall. We must not overreact in the same way. We cannot close the economy a second time. That would bring a catastrophic economic collapse. We need to get back to normal life, whether or not there is a second wave or whether or not they find a vaccine or some other treatment. Which brings me to the state of our economy. I spent almost 20 years working in the financial sector before going into politics. The reason I went into politics was to improve the economy. I never imagined we could one day be in such a catastrophic situation. There are many things we must do for our economy to recover. First, as I just said, we need to bring every sector back to work and avoid a second lockdown. The exceptional spending on support programs has to stop as soon as possible. It's completely unsustainable. We're just digging a deeper and deeper hole with all this debt. Now that the pandemic has subsidized, governments in Canada and everywhere are already preparing to spend billions more on stimulus programs to kickstart the economy. This is the Keynesian solution, but it's wrong. Government spending can, of course, artificially stimulate some sectors of the economy in the short term, but it creates all kinds of distortions and it brings more problems in the longer term. Stimulus economics is like a religion now. It's supposed to be necessary when you have a recession. It also good when the economy is growing. It's good in every situation for establishment politicians because it allows them to keep spending more and to buy votes all the time. They simply send the bill to future taxpayers. Government spending is actually not a stimulus, but a sedative for the economy. When governments spend more, they take away resources from the private sector, which makes it more difficult for businesses to recover. Instead of letting the market allocate resources, governments choose winners and losers on the basis of ideological and bureaucratic fads. Of course, we need to invest in public infrastructure like roads, but we don't need gigantic infrastructure programs with billions wasted on all kinds of unnecessary projects. For me, the best way to ensure a quick economic recovery is to get the government out of the way. We should cut government spending. It's more important than ever to get rid of entire programs that bring no benefit at all to the economy and to Canadians. We can save billions of dollars by eliminating all corporate welfare. And I said all, just abolish it. We can save billions more by eliminating foreign development aid and regional development aid. We should defund the CBC, reduce equalization payments. We must stop federal intrusions in provincial jurisdictions. We should review all federal spending. That's the only way we can return to a balanced budget anytime soon, pay down debt, and cut taxes, which is the only way of stimulating the economy. But that's only part of the answer. There is another fundamental issue that nobody is talking about, but is even more crucial. It's a monetary policy. I know most people are not interested in this. It's complicated, it's borrowing, but there won't be a true sustainable economic recovery until we have monetary reform. Since 1971, when President Nixon ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, we have had a regime of pure fiat money. This means there is no limit to how much money central banks can create out of thin air, especially the Federal Reserve, because the US dollar is the international reserve currency. Everybody uses it to pay for international transactions and for their bank reserves. But all other central banks, including the Bank of Canada, have had similar policies. What are the consequences of this fiat money regime? Excessive money creation creates one bubble after the other. We had the dot-com bubble in the 1990s, then the housing bubble in the first decade of this century. And since then, we've had bubbles in the stock market, in the bond market, and in other sectors. Every time a bubble bursts, governments react with more spending and central banks lower interest rates and inject money in the economy. All sectors are being bailed out. This is the Keynesian recipe to restart the economy. But all it does is keep the boom and bust cycle going. Interest rates have been kept artificially low for 3 decades to encourage people, businesses, and governments to borrow and spend. The result is that there has never been so much debt in the history of the world. Even before the pandemic, debts were at a record high levels, and now they are astronomically high. After each crisis, the recovery is weaker than the one before, and debt goes up even faster. And because debt is so high, interest rates cannot go back to normal levels because everybody would go bankrupt. When you read the articles in the papers about interest rates, conventional economists always say that low interest rates are good for the economy. But that's not true. It allows unprofitable business to survive by borrowing cheap money. We have more and more so-called zombie companies that are not creating any wealth. They should go bankrupt and be sold or restructured, and their resources should be reallocated to other companies. Because of this growing zombie economy, our overall productivity and rate of economic growth go down. Low interest rates encourage a culture of irresponsible consumerism. They reduce consequences for individuals spending beyond their means and encourage spending now instead of saving and planning for the future. Another consequence of this regime is that it increases inequalities. Yes, it increases inequalities. Wealthier people who can buy a house and invest money in financial assets benefit from cheap money and from these bubbles. The rest of the population falls behind. That's one explanation for the populist reaction in many countries. There is nothing new to this phenomenon. Debt crises have happened several times throughout history. Every paper currency in history eventually disappeared. These experiments cannot last long. There is no way all the debt in the world can be repaid. That's why central banks are now printing money at record speed and monetizing government debt. The debt will be repaid with a devalued currency, and we will all suffer the consequences through inflation and a lower standard of living. There will also be a wave of defaults and bankruptcies. This monetary system is totally unstable. It must be replaced by a system based on sound money, a system where central banks cannot print infinite amounts of currency, fund the government debt, and keep zombies alive. A system where interest rates are set by the supply of and the demand for real savings and not subject to constant manipulation by bureaucrats. There is no other way to restore sustainable growth and ensure our long-term prosperity, as well as social and political stability. Perhaps the current fiat money regime will survive a few more years, and we will go through another boom-bust cycle. But at some point, it will inevitably crash. The dollar will be replaced by something else as the international reserve currency. I believe this new regime will bring back some kind of gold standard. Central banks around the world have been accumulating gold for many years as reserve assets to back their currencies. Those of China and Russia especially, because they have a geopolitical interest in ending the American dollar's status as the international reserve currency. Canada needs to prepare for this coming monetary revolution. We are the only major economy with no gold reserves. They were all sold by previous governments that put us in a very vulnerable situation. More Canadians need to be aware of this. It must once again be part of our political debates. I think I'm the only public figure in Canada who talks about this issue. As you will recall, at the last election, I was also the only leader who talked about lower immigration and multiculturalism, the only leader who questions climate change alarmism, the only leader who offered policies about reforming equalization, ending corporate welfare, reforming healthcare, defunding the CBC, opposing the UN globalist agenda, and several other issues that should be at the forefront of our political debates. Many of these ideas are popular among Canadians, even though they are considered politically incorrect by the leftist establishment. But discussing controversial issues and pushing the boundaries of acceptable discourse is absolutely necessary. This strategy may not win elections in the short term. I realistically don't expect to be Prime Minister after the next election. What I absolutely want is to shift the Overton window to change the climate of opinion. In fact, that's the only kind of climate change I care about. It will be easier once I'm back in Parliament with a team of People's Party MPs ready to fight for the ideas we believe in. You don't necessarily need to form government to change the way Canada is governed. The Reform Party had a huge influence on the Chrétien government's economic reforms in the 1990s. The policies advocated for decades by the Greens and the NDP are now being implemented by the Trudeau government. Conversely, if you are elected without a clear mandate and without some kind of widespread ideological support, you won't achieve anything. And I'm sorry to have to say this, but that's exactly what happened to the government I was part of. We did not adopt any major reform that would have substantially moved Canada in a conservative direction. What is the legacy of the Harper government? 6 months after Trudeau's election, it was almost all gone. Nothing remains today. The Conservative Party believes it can only get elected by pandering to every group and promising targeted tax credits to enough voters, not by convincing the electorate that it has the best conservative policies to govern the country, but rather by buying votes. Whether O'Toole or Mackay is selected as leader, it will make no difference. They either won't win the next election, or if they win, they will only tinker with the status quo. The conservative establishment is interested only in one thing: power. I have absolutely no interest in their brand of politics anymore. As principled conservatives, classical liberals, libertarians, nationalists, and populists, we have no choice but to defend our ideas with passion and conviction if we want them to win the debates and eventually to serve as the basis for government decision. We should all be grateful that there are organizations like Civitas and True North that are devoted to spreading these ideas. Thank you again for what you do and for inviting me to have this discussion with you today. Thank you.
Max, thank you so much for those remarks. A lot of really thought-provoking ideas that you discussed there. I wanted to start by asking you a little bit more about the idea behind, you talked about how stimulus has all these sort of unintended consequences that hurt the environment, or sorry, hurt the economic outcome.
It can hurt the environment also.
That's fair enough. One of the questions I had for you, though, so it was the government that led the decision to shut down the economy because of the coronavirus. So if you're a business owner or if you're a worker who was unemployed or your business was destroyed because of a government mandated program, do you think in that case there is sort of a moral reasoning justification behind providing bailouts, or I don't know what you'd call them, bailouts or stimulus or basically reimbursement? Do you think in that case it was justified that the government, went billions of dollars into debt to give that money to Canadians?
Yes, maybe in the beginning of the lockdown, because as you remember, Candice, in the beginning, the reason for the lockdown was to be sure that our emergency room in hospital will be able to deal with the situation. And so I think the population was in board at that time with that decision. So they did the lockdown, but after a couple of days and weeks, we understand that they were successful and we didn't have any emergency that was not able to deal with the situation. But the lockdown was prolonged for a long time, and I think that's why we have to spend all these billion of dollars on the program for businesses and people. So the solution in the beginning, yes, maybe a very short lockdown, and you can help people that will be affected or would have been affected by that. But at the end, that's why I said we don't need a lockdown next time, because now the new goal for the government, the federal government and provincial governments, is to stop the propagation of the virus. But that was not the goal in the beginning. And they are telling us right now, we may have a second wave. I don't want another lockdown, and we don't have to pay for that. So the cost is huge because we have a so long lockdown, and that was not necessary.
Absolutely. I had a question about where you were talking about monetary policy as well. You sort of talked about how we moved away from the gold standard. This is obviously not a Canadian problem. This is a sort of Western democracy global problem. But you said that the solution was more of a return to a currency that's tied to something like some kind of precious metal or resource. What do you make of the sort of rise of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology that allows for these sort of new competing online currencies? Do you think that could potentially be something that could save us from the sort of catastrophe picture that you painted there?
I don't think so. Gold has always been the real money. In the 19th century, actually, we had a kind of a gold standard, and that was one of the most prosperous era of the 19th century. Was a very prosperous era at that time. And so, yes, I know that there's other kind of currency, but I think that we must go back to the gold standard that we had at that time. But you're right, Candice, to say that we cannot take that decision alone. It must be, an international convention, an international meeting, and they will have to find a new kind of gold standard. But what we can do alone, instead, right now, the Bank of Canada has inflation target of 2%. So they want inflation 2% every year. But 2% inflation every year, it's a lot of inflation. Why 2% inflation target is good, but not 20% inflation target? We can have an agreement with the Bank of Canada on a 0% inflation target. So like that, everybody will keep their purchasing power. And, inflation is not good. Inflation is a hidden tax and an unfair tax. So I prefer to have real tax than having the same amount of money in my pockets, but I cannot buy the same amount of goods and services because of inflation. So we can start that before going to a gold standard in Canada by asking the Bank of Canada to have a 0% inflation target. So like that, Canadians will keep their purchasing power.
Okay, I feel like these concerns and alarms over these issues, sound money. I've been hearing them, for a long time, a decade at least, and there doesn't really ever seem to be that kind of day of reckoning that people warn about. So, after the last recession, 2007, 2008, there was a lot of government stimulus, a lot of government spending. There was big concerns over a debt cliff and whether the United States was going to run out of money, and then that sort of issue was solved and passed. And there doesn't ever really seem to be that day of reckoning. It's hard to understand how these issues impact everyday people and how it affects workers and business owners. I know you did describe it a little bit in your remarks about how this could lead to defaults and inflation, that kind of thing, but I wonder if you could kind of explain a little further about how these bad monetary policies impact everyday people.
The question that people are asking, it's where the money is coming from. Every day the Trudeau government and Justin Trudeau was before the news in a press conference, and every day he had a new announcement and he was giving more money. So at the end, where the money is coming from, that's why the monetary policy is important. The Trudeau government can have a huge deficit right now because the Bank of Canada is buying Canadian bond, and that's not the market. So you can look at the balance sheet of the Bank of Canada. It may be look technical, but if you look at the balance sheet, the Bank of Canada increased money supply by $350 billion since the beginning of the crisis. They created money out of thin air to what? To buy Canadian bonds and also bonds from Newfoundland and Saskatchewan, because the market was not there. People didn't want to buy bonds in Newfoundland because Newfoundland is almost bankrupt. So that was the Bank of Canada. They print money, they buy bonds, but at the end they created money, and that will, in the short term, create inflation. So I understand that people may not understand all the details of monetary policies, but at the end, when a bank is creating money and buy bonds, and they were buying also securities, so the Fed is doing that. That's where the money is coming from. It's coming from the Bank of Canada buying Canadian bonds instead of the free market. Yes, our Canadian bonds are still sold in the free market, but the Bank of Canada is there to keep the interest rate very low for the government. But at the end, we'll have to pay for that. That's why I said in my remarks that we may have, bankruptcies. We may have inflation. That will be the way people will pay for all that, and that's bad news.
Absolutely. We know that Canada's debt is now nearing $1 trillion if it hasn't gotten there already. And just this year alone, we're going to have a deficit that government won't even give a fiscal update because they say they just have no idea what, the numbers are changing, probably because of Trudeau's daily, spending giveaway announcements that he gives. But the coronavirus has really had a huge impact on our society, Maxime. I mean, it's hard to understate the sort of substantial changes that we've undergone in the last few months. I don't think anything like this has happened in at least 75 years. Do you think that there will be a return to normal? Do you think we'll go back to what life was like in January, February of 2020? Or do you think that the world is just sort of substantially changed and we're not going to really go back to that new normal?
Yes, that's a good question. Some people are saying, it won't come. We won't live like we did before the coronavirus. We'll have the before coronavirus and after coronavirus. But I don't believe that. People will see that, it's not the end of the world. And, we can do a lot of things to protect people. But I think, business as usual will come back. It will come back. And people, what I didn't like with the coronavirus is the government, the Trudeau government and other government are looking at the population like children and telling them what to do. And the opposition in Canada and in some provinces also, the opposition is not there. Just remember, Candice, in the beginning of all that, Trudeau asked for being a dictator for 6 months, and the conservative, the liberal, the conservative, the NDP, and the Bloc said, okay, you can govern with order in council without the parliament. You know, when you have a crisis, it's important to have debates. That's the time when it's very important to have debates in the House. So I think, you know, the life will come back like we had before. And I don't think that we must have before coronavirus and after coronavirus. No, I think people understand what happened, and the life will return to normal as soon as possible.
Well, let's hope so. About that, Trudeau's sort of style, and I think we've seen it from some other political provincial leaders, is sort of been to defer to experts. So, you know, we're just going to rely on this expert class of people who have information that we don't, and we should always trust them. The problem, of course, Maxime, is that when you deal with organizations like the World Health Organization, they don't seem to be very transparent, seem to be a little bit corrupt, and perhaps, you know, too closely aligned with countries like China than is for comfort. You also have flip-flopping. So we were told that closing the border wouldn't do anything and that it was discriminatory. And then all of a sudden we were told the border was closed. We were told not to wear masks because it was doing more harm than good. And then we were told to wear masks. And then we were told that protesting was deeply evil, that going out and protesting was reckless and putting everyone's life in danger. And then all of a sudden there was a protest that the sort of experts in the media approved of, and all of a sudden the guidelines completely change. So do you think that there's some pitfalls to this style, that deferring to so-called experts, and do you think there could potentially be a backlash, a societal backlash against it?
Well, I think the population can understand what happened right now, and actually, you know, all these what Trudeau and the expert were saying, you know, people, that's why I think people are looking for the news with you, with True North, and with other channel than the traditional news. But you know, when you take a decision based on expert, there's expert on a lot of subject, but the problem is the Trudeau government didn't have the courage to say, you know, it's the World Health Organization that he was listening, and they, like you just said, they are not credible. So there's a lot of experts, and now people can have their news on other experts that are saying, you know, all these contradiction. You just name all of these contradiction. At the end, you know, people will judge the government and will judge the decision that the government were taking during that crisis. And that's why I think we will be able to come back to a real life without any mask and anything like that. But the worst of that is the spending. And they created a huge emergency, a huge crisis. And for me, it was like a reason to spend money, to buy votes. Trudeau gave money to you know, the students and every group in the society. That's why I said in my speech, they are pandering to every individual, every group in the society. And that's not the way we are doing politics. You know, we're doing politics for all Canadians, and we are putting this country first. But Trudeau was doing politics just to try to please everybody, and at the end to be reelected.
That's a good point. About your sort of political stances that you've taken, you were one of the only, probably the only politician in Canada that was willing to have difficult discussions when it came to immigration and integration. I think that, you know, your criticisms were always measured and fair, but obviously, you know, there's a disconnect, Max, between the sort of political consensus in Canada and public opinion. I mentioned at the beginning during my intro that True North just recently released a report. We had a poll, a comprehensive poll of Canadians, a scientific poll, that found that 76% of Canadians wanted a total pause on immigration. That included 67% of people who voted Liberal in the last election and 89% of people who voted Conservative. It was unanimous across the board, Max. Majorities of every age group, language group, gender, everything. I haven't seen a consensus like that for immigration in a long time, and yet, the political parties and the media and the experts are all on the other side of that issue. So I just want to know what your thoughts are on that poll that we released, and why there's such this big disconnect between what Canadians believe and what they want, and what the politicians and the experts sort of say is good for us.
I think the politicians, the conservative or the liberals or the NDP, but they're afraid of the mainstream media. Just remember what happened to me during the last election. I said that we must have fewer immigrants, and I said between 100 and 150,000 a year. And so, but some people were saying that I was a racist because of that. And but just because having a discussion on immigration, and I think politicians are afraid of the elite in the media. And I'm very pleased with what I saw in your polling and your data, but I'm not surprised also. The population is there. We need to work for Canadians first. And that's why I said that just in the beginning of the crisis, that we must have a moratorium on immigration until, the unemployment rate will be lower than that. Actually, it's about 12% right now. And Canadians understand that. They want their politician to have policies that will be good for them, and that's okay. But the answer of your question, why other political parties, and precisely the conservative, don't have a policy like that? Because they don't have any courage. They don't want to have that debate. They don't have any conviction. But we are in politics, we at the PPC, to speak about these issues. They're so important for the future of our country. And the conservative are doing polling, and maybe now they will see your poll, and maybe they will change position on that. We'll see what will happen. But we are not doing politics looking at polling, a poll and survey. We are doing politics by conviction. And our goal is to have more people and convince more people that we have the best ideas for a limited government in Ottawa, and for a freer and more prosperous country.
Great, thanks for that. I have one more question, then we'll open up. I know we have a bunch of people waiting to ask you their questions, both in the chat and also attendees have put their hands up. But you talk about courage, Max, and you talk about how politicians are afraid of the media. Well, it doesn't seem like it's just politicians that are being maligned and attacked like you were in the last election. Just in the past week, we saw Rex Murphy, a beloved commentator in Canada, get ridiculed and attacked just for writing a column, just simply saying that Canada is not a country that's overwhelmingly defined by racism. A pretty agreeable statement there, but somehow that's now off limits, and it was incredibly brave of Rex to even put that forward. We saw Stockwell Day, the former leader of the Canadian Alliance, get attacked online and forced to resign from his board positions because he said that there was no systemic racism in Canada, which used to be a pretty mainstream idea. Now apparently it's off limits. And even just more recently, CBC host Wendy Mesley was canceled and fired because of a word that she supposedly said in a closed door meeting over at the CBC. Now, Max, I know there's no love lost between you and Wendy Mesley. She hasn't exactly been fair and kind to you in the past. However, I just want to know what your thoughts are on cancel culture and this sudden rush to judge and to allow a mob of people, mostly young, sort of woke people, to lead our society and to make decisions about who can and cannot have a platform in this country.
Yeah, it is sad. It is sad what happened to Stockwell Day and to Rex Murphy also. These people, the radical leftists, and they are right now, and it's bad to say that, it's sad to say that, they are right now winning the debate. They are choosing the words that we can use and cannot use, but we must not go there. And that's why I said, there's no systemic racism in Canada. We must be proud. We must be proud of our history. And yes, you can have some discrimination sometime, but at individual level, these people want to put us always in a group. black versus white, and so they are doing identity politics. And for me, I'm not doing that, and I'm not politically correct. And I think that's important. But that's sad that today, professor in university, you don't have any debate in university right now, and that must be the place where you can have debates of ideas, but you don't have that right now. So it is the society that we know right now must change, and that's why you must be out there. We must be out there to express what we believe in. And all what happened with the George Floyd, it's a crime, and these people will face the full extent of the law, and that's okay. And I understand that people must leave some racist behavior against them, but that's not the society at all, and that's not the systemic society. We're the global society. We're not. There's no global or systemic racism in this country, and it's bad that you cannot say that anymore. I know that Doug Ford said it, and a couple of seconds after that, he said, no, sorry, yes, there is systemic racism in Canada. So, and I know that François Legault said that there is no systemic racism in this country, and he had all the leftists against him. So we need to be out there and to fight this leftist radical way of life and culture. That's why it's a culture war right now, and it's too bad that we're not a lot out there to fight.
Well, it feels a little bit like conservatives are losing the culture war just because, like you said, the idea that you can't even say Canada's not systemically racist anymore without getting so much pushback. Ideas that used to be on the fringe far left are now mainstream. And I'm talking about the idea of defunding the police, which it used to, even 2 weeks ago, would have been considered a very fringe far left idea. And now it's on the front page of the National Post, and they're promoting it just the same as the Toronto Star is. And a lot of local, governments are considering it, cutting funding or defunding police entirely. How do you think we can combat these ideas, Max? And what do you think specifically about that one, about defunding the police?
We must do the opposite. We must give them all the resources that they need, because law and order is the basis of our society. If you don't have order, law and order, you won't be able to live in a society. So yes, the police and they must have the tools that they need. I don't buy that, and I'm against that 100%. We are in a society, and we must put money where it's very important for the society, and living in a peaceful society and with law and order, for me, that's the most important.
Absolutely. All right, Max, let's open the conversation up a little bit. Looks like we have a question here from Mark P. So let's start with Mark P. And if anyone from the Montreal event would like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand.
So my question, one, Justin Trudeau's been talking about a mandatory vaccine. I think you're probably against it, but I wanted to ask that. And the other one is, how do you propose to fight this? You were saying that Candice, you were saying that it looks like the left is winning the culture war and conservatives are losing, but the left gets to have groups like Antifa operate with impunity, whereas we being conservatives, or anybody who tries to organize that it doesn't agree with Antifa, get protests shut down, people threaten the venues, so it's not an honest win. We don't play by their rules, and they clearly don't play by ours. So how do we meaningfully engage and win, or at least play on the same ball field, right?
Yeah. So thanks, Mark. First, Antifa. I said that Antifa must be on the list of the terrorist organization in Canada. So that's important. They want to impose their vision of the society, and they're communist. They don't want order. They don't want peace, and that's why they must be on the list of the terrorist organization in our country. Second, yes, I'm against having the vaccine, mandatory vaccine. I'm against that for sure. You are right. And answering the question about winning the cultural war, you need to start somewhere. And you know, I'm doing that. Other people are doing that also. But, you know, I believe in the silent majority in our country. And I believe that people don't like what they're saying right now. And so you must not be afraid to speak about what you believe. And that's what I'm doing. But the conservative and Andrew Scheer and other conservative leaders, we don't see them. They don't speak. They're afraid. And it's too bad. But more people will be out there to speak about what they believe. The better will be for everybody. And I believe that, you know, we will win that war. We will win that war because we have the best arguments: freedom of speech, equality of opportunity. Everybody must be equal before the law. And so, you know, we believe in the Western civilization values. So we must be out there and be proud. And that's why I said also, you know, I will always fight for freedom and equality in our country. But I'm not going to express shame for crimes that I did not commit. That's important. And I won't feel guilt because of the color of my skin or because of my gender. That's important. So we must be out there, and more people will be out there and speak about our belief, about what we believe in. The better will be for us and for the society. But you need to start. You need not to be afraid, and you need courage, like I said in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Hopefully you felt like your question was answered there. We'll move on to the next question. Irina, you're up next. If we can get you up and unmuted and on camera, you can go ahead and ask your question to Maxime.
Bonsoir, Monsieur Bernier.
Bonsoir.
Je voudrais bien de pratiquer mon français, mais je vais parler en anglais.
Parfait, c'est correct.
Okay, so I live in Ontario, and my question is about election reform in Canada. I would like to know your opinion about it. And from my experience, and to my shame, first time when Trudeau was elected, I voted for him just because he promised this reform. This past election, Monsieur Bernier, I voted for your party. I put signs on my lawn. And from now on, moving forward, I will vote only based on my consciousness and the fact that I support platform of people that I'm voting for. So I try to ask other people about your past opinions on this subject. And I was told that when you were a conservative
member of parliament,
you did not support electoral reform in Canada. Thank you.
Yes, you're right, Irina. When I was a conservative and now, you know, I don't think we need electoral reform in this country. We have a lot of reforms to do for having a freer and a more prosperous country. And, you know, I'm too busy to work for the reform that will have a real impact on your life. And if you want to have an electoral reform, you'll need to reopen the Constitution. And I'm always saying that, you know, we must respect the Constitution. And if you reopen the Constitution, that will be a huge debate. And so the most important, look at our platform, different ideas, and our philosophy: individual freedom, personal responsibility, respect, and fairness. So that's why we don't have at the People's Party of Canada in our platform a reform for the an electoral reform. It may be, we don't have the best system, I agree with that, but I don't want to spend time to change the electoral, the way that we are elect people. And I think that it can be at our advantage if we change that. If we have a system with different than this one, based on representation, based on a system maybe like in US or in France, it can be easier for me and for us at the People's Party to have candidates being elected. But it's okay. We are playing the game and we have this system, and that's not the best one. But we will play inside that system, and I don't want to change the system. I want to be sure that people will understand that we have very, very important reform for you to have more freedom, more of your money in your pockets, that this government and the future government will respect Canadians, will work for Canadians and for our country, and not for the UN and not for the World Health Organization, working for Canadians. And that's the part of, that's why we are putting Canadian first. But we still have a lot of reform to do to achieve our goals. So actually, we won't have anything on the electoral reform arena.
That's unfortunate because I don't see a possibility at the moment for my vote to be, validated through voting, my choice to be validated through voting. But I respect your opinion, and I hope other people have interesting questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Evening.
Thank you, Irina. Maxime, it's very rare to hear a politician say that he opposes a policy that would personally help him and his party. So obviously that's a position that comes from conviction and not expediency.
That's why I said, Candice, I'm not there to please everybody. You know, if you like what we are saying, come with us. If you don't, I respect you. That's your choice. We want to offer another choice to Canadians. You know, there's all these traditional established political party, and we are there with a platform. And if you like that, we're doing, come with us. If not, you know, you have other choices.
Absolutely. All right, we have a couple more hands up. We also have a written question that I'll go to. This one comes from Karen Selleck, and it was sort of related to a question that was already asked, but more detail. So Karen asks, Max, what is your position on the possibility of mandatory vaccinations? Apparently, Canada has just ordered 37 million syringes, expecting to vaccinate everyone. I believe that the harm caused by vaccinations... whoops, the question just disappeared. But the harm caused by vaccinations have been underreported, and she's happy to discuss it more with you. What are your thoughts on that? But
very simple. I'm against mandatory vaccination in Canada. That's it. I think it's very clear.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's go to the people with their hands up. I think this person, they have their hand up, so let's go to them, and they can ask a question.
My name is Scott. I've lived in Canada a long time, since 1992, but I only became a Canadian citizen 2 years ago because my daughter used to complain at the border that it would take too long for Dad to get across. She had a Canadian passport, but I did not. So I have a couple of questions for Maxine. You're obviously the brightest person in and around Ottawa because you understand the economics behind poverty in this country. Poverty is driven by all of this pandering and printing money. Long-term Keynesian economics, everyone likes to read the forward part. Read the back part. The back part of Keynesian economics states that untradable paper currencies is the long-term goal of continuing to print without backing it. But for Canadians, they need to see a roadmap. So the roadmap needs to be sustained inflation over a long period of time and protecting against economic colonisation, especially from places like China. they've got cash and they can just buy big chunks of Canada. And to do that, do you feel that onshoring a lot of Canadian manufacturing with tax credits, because we know that the economic multiplier effect for manufacturing is between 5 and 8, depending on which sector you're in, would be a pathway to economic stability in Canada?
But first, if we want to have economic growth, we need to have more investment, more private investment. And that's why in our platform, we said you will have a flat tax on business. Mm-hmm. You will have also no more capital gains tax, and you will be able to depreciate your investment in a year instead of 5 or 6 years. So accelerated capital, we said accelerated depreciation for capital investment. So all that, it's for business, for small business and big corporation to be able to invest and create jobs in this country. So if you want to bring back some corporations that are in other countries, you need to be able to attract them. And the first thing you must do is to, yes, being open to lower taxes and no more capital gains tax. That would be the beginning. But at the same time also, because your question can be linked with the security question in our country and what happened with China recently, we need to look at our relationship with China for sure, and being sure that the important industry like healthcare and vaccine and things like that will be able to have that in North America and not only depending on China. And I think we learn a lot with that coronavirus crisis. So the relationship with China must be looked on the base of our security for security for the goods and services that we need that are very important for us in Canada. And so we must have a look at that. But answering your question globally, if you have a big tax reform and based on being sure that you will have more private investment, that's the most important. That must be the goal of the tax reform, to bring more private investment, so lower taxes, no more capital gains tax, and that will help. And actually, we're not competitive right now with the US. A lot of investment are going in the US and in other countries because of our tax system, because of the changes that the Trudeau government did a couple of years ago.
Yes, I know the Australian government brought in a capital gains tax for small business, $150,000 instant write-off. So, and they have committed to that for 5 years now. And as far as global security, the threshold for Chinese investment now is $0.
Yeah.
Every Chinese investment goes under review by the minister.
Investment Canada Act. I was industry minister, and there's a legislation in this country, Investment Canada Act. And under that legislation, when there's a huge investment coming from another country, there's a threshold, and you must look at it and being sure that that investment will bring benefit for the country. But concerning China, you're right. We may have a look to that legislation to be sure that, they won't be able to come and buy, very important mining industry or other industry. So that's why we must have a new look at that Canada Investment Act.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial for the future of this country to look very honestly outside and inside, and be able to make the distinction that the cultural difference of one belt, one road is not in the long-term interest of Canadian middle class. It just is not.
Like why we also, the 5G corporation, and I was very pleased to know that TELUS and other Canadians, telecommunication corporations, decided not to use the 5G from Huawei. So, but the federal government didn't take any decision. I'm very disappointed because in UK, in US, the security agency told their government that they must not admit 5G network from Huawei in their country. And it's our private sector that took that decision, and that was a good one. But the federal government doesn't want to act on that up to now.
Yes, I know. Canada has the distinction of being the only member of Five Eyes that, at a government level, did not make that decision.
Yeah, I hope they will.
Yeah, it is an absolute shame to Trudeau's government. An absolute shame.
You're right.
That they have distinguished themselves by not protecting the Canadian people.
Absolutely. Scott, thank you so much for your questions. Those were great. Max, we have a couple of other sort of fiscal and tax related questions that have been written in. So I'll go to those. Charles McCoy is sort of wondering what you think the ideal tax rate is, and at what tax rate would Canadian offshore wealth begin to repatriate back into the country?
Yeah, I think we need to have a big tax reform in this country. The last time we had that, it was in 1965 by the Carter Commission, and they look at our tax system. So what I said during the last election, our platform is to have a tax system that will have only two rates. So the first one, people, if you are earning less than $15,000, you must not pay any income tax at the federal level. So that must start at 15K. And you must have a tax rate of 10%. And after that, 20% for people earning more than 25K. And a maximum, right now, because of the federal level and the provincial level, so you can impose a tax bracket at the federal level, but if a province is imposing more on your brackets, people will pay more. So that's why we need to have a big reform about our tax system globally, because, and the goal, like I said in the beginning, the goal is for people to keep more of their money in their pocket. But together, if you have the federal tax rate and provincial tax rate in Ontario, right now, the maximum tax rate will be 53%. So 53% for me, it's too much. More than half of what you are having as an income, it's going to the federal and the provincial government. So we must have a tax system that will give more of your own money in your pockets. We can lower the income tax rate. We can also lower the GST. We need to think about that. But all our tax reform must be based on being sure that people will be able to invest and having more of their own money in their pockets. So answering your question, Candice, it is hard to look at it right now because you have the provincial and the federal tax system. But I can tell you that before the next election, we'll look at a reform in the tax system. We had something at the last election, and I said we will balance the budget in 2 years. But right now, you cannot do that with that huge deficit of more than $250 billion. I cannot say that we will balance the budget in 2 years, but we need to have a reform on the our tax system in Canada. Yes.
All right. One other question written in. This is from Charles McCoy as well. It says, how impactful do you think it would be if the public sector wages and benefits were normalized to private sector rates? I know just during this crisis alone, there's been such a huge discrepancy between private sector workers who have seen layoffs and reduced time, reduced salaries, and public sector, which have basically had no changes whatsoever. So what do you think about that idea of normalizing the two rates?
I agree with that. And actually, Philip Cross, an economist, also said that people working in the public sector, they have a good salary, but also a very good pension. So we must look at all that together. And actually, I agree that people working in the public sector have more advantages than people working in the private sector. Yes, we must look at it for sure.
We have another written question, Maxime. This comes from Sam Eskenazi. Sam says, Maxime, you spoke so eloquently and your points are fairly standard conservative and classical liberal ideas, yet you have been accused of being a racist or white supremacist or worse. I know that the left often uses this as a go-to insult on anyone who disagrees with the established orthodoxy they have decided upon, but perhaps you could speak a little about why you think that attack line was effective and some Canadians, and what can be done about it.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to let you know that I'm suing actually Mr. Kinsella. I was supposed to be informed the court this June, but because of the COVID-19, it will be this fall. And I spoke with my lawyers and we have a very strong case. So, and I'm not a racist. And that's why, you know, Kinsella, with money coming from the Conservative Party of Canada, tried during the last election to discredit me and the People's Party. So we are fighting against that right now. What will be the next election? In the next, I think they were successful because when I had maybe 4 minutes in from the national media on TV, I always had a question about racism, and I had to be on the defensive for maybe 2 minutes on when you have only 4 minutes. So I think that won't happen next time because I will win my case against Kinsella. And actually people will look at the survey and the one that you just did, that, you know, it's normal to have a discussion on immigration in this country. And that's what the people want. So I think it would be very difficult next time to try to brand our party as a racist party. And that being said, they did the same thing with Preston Manning. When Preston Manning created the Reform Party, the first election, people were saying, you know, the opposition were saying, the liberals, that Preston was a racist and that's a racist party. They did that to Preston Manning. That was a strategy that went well for them for the first election. But after that, you know, people knew the Reform Party, knew Preston Manning, and these arguments were not serious. So I believe that the next time I won't have to fight that, and I will have more time to explain our principles and philosophy.
Yeah, it's like the word used to have such a serious meaning. Being called a racist was one of the worst things you could be called, but it's like the left uses it so often to criticize anyone who has a differing opinion. It's just, to some people, you know, it's so common, it's become like a meaningless term, but then I guess to other people it still has that original meaning. Well, good for you for fighting back. We have another question from the floor. This one is for Zork. The floor is yours.
Hi, Maxime. I'm a big fan, a supporter. Despite being a registered libertarian, I voted for you in the last election. I support all of your policies, but I have a hard question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly a week ago, I got an email from you asking me to sign a petition to ban Antifa in Canada. I am Hungarian. When I was young, I spent some time in a communist jail for the horrendous crime of sedition. Now, you can't find many people who would be more resolutely against communists than Antifa and the whole movement. Yet I had some question, had some problem with this request from you. Antifa people committing a whole lot of very clearly punishable crimes. Banning them is a political solution. Are you really sure that banning a political answer to a law enforcement problem is the right answer?
Well, when I'm saying banning, I want to put them, like you just said in the beginning, Antifa is a communist organization that wants to destroy our society. So I want to put them on, and they're terrorists, you know, what they're doing, what they've done and what they're doing, you know, it's a terrorist act. So I want to put them on our terrorist list in Canada. That will be the first step. But that at the same time, I want to give more resources to police to be able to do their job. And, you know, when there's a protest, people must be able to protest peacefully in this country. And when you have these Antifa people that are coming, you cannot protest anymore. And if you are in a democratic country, you must be able to protest. I will give you an example. I had an event in Southern Ontario with Dave Rubin, and on free speech. And, we had Antifa people that did everything to block us to enter the building. And they were very vocal, and we needed to have the police. So we don't need these kind of people. You are in a democratic country, and I'm sure very proud to be Canadian, and we must be able to protest peacefully. But these people must be, this organization must be put on the list of our terrorist organization. That will be the beginning. But at the same time, I'm for protest. Yes, if you have something to say, you must be able to protest peacefully.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the questions. So we have one more written question, and then we have one more call in, and that should end nicely. So the next question comes from Jonathan Ng. He says, I attended a webinar this week about political messaging. The message is that the right can't succeed by presenting cold, technical figures in an environment where the left is so adept at presenting appeals of sympathetic victims. How can we improve messaging to move public opinion in favor of truly free market policies?
I don't agree with that. I don't agree that we need to be out there with good arguments, and that's the most important. So, if you, I don't want us to play the games of the left. They have their strategy, and we must be out there with our ideas. The best example, we started the People's Party a year ago, and the same year we had an election. We were able to create a party to have 1.6% of the vote. And, I was speaking about ideas during that election, and people are ready, because for me as a politician, I think that people are intelligent, and I'm speaking to their intelligence, and that's what I want to do, and that's what I'm doing. So we were able to have 1.6% of the vote. More than 300,000 people voted for the PPC. And if you look at the history, if you look at the Green Party, it took them 20 years and 5 elections to have more than 1.6% of the vote. And we did that in less than a year. So I think that people must be out there, and yes, with rational arguments. Look at the other people that are on the web and are speaking and telling people what we believe, like Dave Rubin or professor in Toronto. What's his name? Sorry?
Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, Jordan. Thank you, Candice. Jordan. These people are speaking with rational arguments, and you can win. You can win with rational arguments. That's what I'm saying.
Excellent. Mandy would like to know that she says, would love to end the media bailout. It is hurting our democracy. Maxime, what is your opinion on the idea of a media bailout?
That will be the first thing we'll do as a government. No more bailout. We want the journalists and the media to be independent from the government, not dependent from the government. And now Trudeau, what he's doing is picking the media that he likes and giving money to them. If you're a good media, you'll be able to raise money. That's why we want to defund the CBC, and all the money that the Trudeau government put aside and gave to the media will abolish that, and it will be a fair deal for every media in this country.
Great. Well, I think that's a positive note to end on, Maxime. So thank you so much. I mean, speaking as a journalist from an independent outlet, that we've found a model that works. We have a very big base of people who, patrons and people who support us and people who believe in our mission. And yes, we found a model that works. So it does exist. You can do it in the free market.
Good for you, Candice.
So thank you so much for your time and all your thoughtful answers. It's been really interesting and engaging, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us here, Max. So thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Candice, and Bill also. So that was very, I think, important for me to participate in that. So thank you. I appreciate all that.